Welcome to today's session of preparing AutoCAD drawings for ARCHIBUS. My name is Garrett Henry and I'm from Horizant. I will be stepping you through this video session. Today's goal is to educate you on what you need to prepare your drawings for in order to introduce them into the ARCHIBUS application. Currently you may be at a point in time in which you have a set of drawings in which you already have that you want to ensure that is ready to introduce into the ARCHIBUS application. We're going to be going through a series of topics that will help you out with that goal. We'll be covering the considerations when working with those drawings. We'll be looking at the requirements that are required for the ARCHIBUS application. I'll also suggest some best practice suggestions and going through different topics accordingly. The benefit out of this video is you'll be able to clean up your drawings. Your drawings will be better prepared in order to use them with the ARCHIBUS application. You also will spend less time later on correcting those issues if you are proactive and be able to do it prior to bringing them into the ARCHIBUS product. With that being said, the first term that we have to start looking at is the master drawing aspects. The master drawings are essentially a set of drawings that are a series of as-built or current set of drawings that are used currently in your environment. You want to be able to identify a unique list that are not essentially project drawings, but an up-to-date master list. We call these master drawings inside the ARCHIBUS world. So there's several items in which you have to be considered with this master drawing set. The first off is being a naming convention. So as you have your master drawing set, you may have a series of drawings, whether it's 10 or whether it's 100, and you're going to want to come up with some sort of a naming convention of those individual drawings. So those drawings are representative of different floors, so you may come up with a nomenclature or a naming convention that identifies the building and maybe a floor to identify that drawing name. So we want to be able to come up with a nomenclature for the DWG file name that is going to be unique for each individual drawing. So you're going to want to come up with a nomenclature that you can reuse and name all your drawings accordingly before bringing them into the ARCHIBUS application. So that's definitely something you're going to have to decide upon and start renaming your drawings accordingly. Once you have your drawings renamed, the question is where do you put them? Where do you store them? If it's on a file share or in some sort of other model that you want to follow, you have to decide on where these drawings are going to live. The location of the drawings, if you go with a file share, in that file share, do you have a segregation of buildings in folders? What is that segregation? And be able to store it all inside of that location. The other aspect is do you consider XREFs or deal with a security model accordingly when dealing with your drawings? Who has access to these as-built in this location? Do you break them out into different XREFs? You can go ahead and take an XREF, break it out into a furniture drawing, into a architectural drawing, into a ARCHIBUS aspects drawing, and be able to combine those XREFs together. So you want to start coming up with some security considerations. If you want to separate them out, who has access to the architecture, who has access to the furniture, who has access to the ARCHIBUS drawings, in order to start controlling those accesses up on that file share. And again, you can put them into different folder structures if you want to, and then grant access on a Windows basis to those different folder structures. So again, take the time to consider that up front so that you can start laying out your files accordingly to ensure that you've got the right people updating the right floor plans. One of the other things you want to consider when looking at your file shares and your XREFs when dealing with this sort of concept is that are you looking at a SAS model? SAS modeling inside of ARCHIBUS can also dictate the location of those master drawings. You can take that master drawing list and actually store it inside the ARCHIBUS database and call it down through drawing management concepts inside the SAS model. So again, it really depends on whether you're using a file share or you're using some other methodology like SAS modeling to control who has access to those files, where are they stored, and are they in a unified location which people have access to. The other thing you want to make sure of is when you're dealing with the ARCHIBUS users, did that ARCHIBUS user have access to this file share as part of that process? So other things to consider. Next item is layering conventions. Layering conventions are very important inside the AutoCAD world as well as inside the ARCHIBUS world. The items of which we want to be able to have consistency is the layer naming. Layer naming is very important inside of AutoCAD, where we come up and create a layer and then be able to drop or draw our objects onto that layer. Well, when we're dealing with ARCHIBUS and that layering methodology, we want our layers to be consistent from one drawing to the next to the next. The logic behind that is if we go and ask for a layer to be turned on inside the ARCHIBUS web product, we want then all of our drawings to turn on that same layer or control that same layer. So if we start having different drawing layers and nomenclature accordingly, then obviously we're not going to have consistency of these reports that are utilizing those drawing layers. So consistency from one to the next, again, you guys may already have a layer management CAD standard that you already have inside your drawings. So you may already be following one, which is great. You can reuse that, and then just as long as there's consistency from one drawing to the next. The next topic is drawing units. Drawing units, we want to be able to take our drawings and be able to ensure that our drawing units are set in each one of these different drawings. This is going in and ensuring whether it's an imperial or a metric drawing and making sure we define that. So you want to make sure that those are actually set properly inside each one of our drawings. Inside of ARCHIBUS, we can actually specify whether that's a metric or an imperial drawing inside the ARCHIBUS product itself. The ARCHIBUS product will then utilize that units in order to make calculations in its software as per those units. So we want to make sure of that. The other thing that a lot of clients ask us at this point is saying, well, can we have one drawing or one building as one set of units and another drawing or another building as another set? And yes, you can. ARCHIBUS does allow multi-units within different floor plans. Obviously, one floor will be a metric and another floor could be an imperial, and you can use those two different floor plans within the same ARCHIBUS project and be able to utilize them. ARCHIBUS will then also have the ability to drop in blocks and be able to scale the blocks between one drawing and the next. So if you take an imperial block and be able to drop it into a metric drawing, it will convert it and scale it accordingly for you. So those are the sort of things we want to be concerned with within the corresponding master drawings. So what I want to do at this point in time, I'm going to flip over into the AutoCAD aspect, look through some of these examples, and be able to showcase them up on the screen in case you're not intimately familiar with where these are located inside the product. So let me try to get a AutoCAD open here. So there I've got my AutoCAD drawing open. So now I've just got a sample drawing inside of here where I can essentially go in and take a look at the example and be able to showcase the characteristics of each one of these line items that I'm looking for. The first item we were talking about was naming convention. So here you can see inside my drawing, I've got HQ20 is my drawing name. So I've gone and have each one of my drawings has HQ as the building name and 20 is my floor accordingly. So that's an example of some sort of nomenclature in which is going to help you out accordingly based on those different concepts. So obviously you're going to have your own nomenclature and your own methodology. So I just want to show you an example. Second point we were looking at was the XREF concepts. In case you're not familiar with the XREFs, essentially you can open the XREF window in order to work with the XREFs by typing in XREF onto the command line, and then it pops your window up. Inside of here, you can start dealing with your different breakout of your XREFs. So this is where you can go in and be able to assign on this floor plan your architectural and your furniture, if this is your ARCHIBUS drawing, and be able to XREF them or overlay them over top into the corresponding drawing. ARCHIBUS does allow the XREFs in order to be used within the drawings, so this is definitely something that you may consider as part of the process. ARCHIBUS does handle XREFs very well. So that's the XREF sort of concepts. Beyond that, we have layering conventions. We were talking briefly about layer naming. So yeah, I can open up the layer dialog box, essentially, and this is a list of my layers that I've got inside of here. Now, you want to have consistency of your different layers in here. Again, from one drawing to the next, it's these nomenclature that we want to see. So here, for example, I have the WA as an example, maybe a wall layer. And in my next drawing, do I say WA or is it a WALL? So we want to be consistent from one drawing to the next with this nomenclature and be able to make sure that it is consistent. And again, you guys may have your own layering standards that you're already following, which is great if you do, and you can just reuse that or continue to use that inside of your drawings moving forward. For those that don't, this is definitely something that you want to consider moving forward and being consistent on each one of your different layering conventions. So that's the corresponding layers. Moving on from here, we do have units. I will get the units dialog box open here. So we go and type units in the command line. It opens our units dialog box. And inside of here, we can specify whether it's an architectural or a imperial drawing by my pull-down menu. And then I can define my insertion value, whether it's inches, meters, millimeters, again, depending on what your unit of scale is inside of here, and setting it. I always double check this one for many of my drawings inside of here by quickly going and getting something in the drawing that I'm familiar or referenced with. For example, maybe a door. So here, for example, I would zoom into that corresponding door and do a distance on that door of something I'm familiar with. So here, for example, I'd measure a door. It tells me it's 3 feet. I'm saying, okay, now it's probably set accordingly because that does sound correct. And this is where in the units, if it's not, I'd come back, make my corresponding change, and save my drawing. Again, I'll go back and remeasure it. So again, if I swapped it to metric or decimal, I do the measurement, it might come out as 910 millimeters, so it's going to be a millimeters-based drawing. And this is where you'd set that inside that drawing. So you're going to want to take some time to make sure that that's set properly, and therefore go through those different line items accordingly and make sure that they're set. All right. Moving on from that, so once we go ahead and get our drawings laid out appropriately, we're looking at standards, we're looking at drawing nomenclature, we've taken a look at our layers, everything seems to be copacetic, and we want to start diving into our ARCHIBUS concepts of polylines, or depicting space inside of our corresponding aspects. Inside the ARCHIBUS product, there's a couple of different criteria that you can be able to take an AutoCAD drawing with and be able to tag it back as an asset inside the ARCHIBUS product. The first one is being the polylines. The polylines are essentially a depiction of space. And I'm going to take a room or an office and be able to define that space as a polyline so I can start calculating out what the area is of that office or workstation so that I can read that inside the ARCHIBUS product. The other aspects that we may deal with, and I'll mention them a little bit later, but is the blocks, whether it's equipment blocks or furniture blocks, can also be attached to the ARCHIBUS product. And I'll talk about those a little bit later. So focusing on the polylines, there's a couple of requirements that ARCHIBUS does require when drawing that polyline. So as you're starting to draw your polylines out of your offices and your workstations, you can start dealing with that sort of concept. First things first is polyline. A lot of people are familiar with line versus familiar with the line command versus the polyline command. The line command allows you to draw individual lines, whereas the polyline is a closed object. That closed object will allow you to calculate out the area, whereas the line command does not allow you to calculate out the area. So we want to use the polyline command as much as possible and be able to work with that. Now inside that polyline command, each command has the ability to close that polyline. This is very important when calculating out the area, because if you don't close that polyline, you won't know, or the product won't know, how much area that space takes up unless it's closed. If you leave it open, it does take a best guess to try to close it, but it's not always accurate. So you want to try to close as many of the polylines as possible as you draw them to ensure that it gets the right calculated area. The second consideration is make sure all your polylines are drawn on the Z-axis as 0. You want to draw them all in the same plane. It doesn't have to be on 0, but as long as they're all in the same plane. Essentially, it's the 3D plane, and it's dealing with the Z-axis within that 3D plane. So that when you draw that polyline, you're not drawing it on two different axes, actually the third axis accordingly, and then skewing that area calculation, because it might be slightly larger because of the Z-axis. So you want to make sure you're just consistent across the board, so in case you have furniture and you have 3D furniture and you're using O-snaps or something of that nature, and you're drawing that polyline to make sure that it's all in the same plane. So again, just try to be consistent on that so that your area calculations measure out correctly and you're not taking into consideration the Z-axis when you're drawing that polyline. All right. The other aspect that you have to be concerned with as a requirement for ARCHIBUS is layers. ARCHIBUS has the ability to look for a specific layer with its COTS out-of-the-box product, and you just have to be aware of that. There's 3 different layers that ARCHIBUS works with inside of its out-of-the-box. The first one is the prototype layer. The prototype layer is where you essentially draw your polylines on or put your equipment or furniture onto that corresponding layer. And ARCHIBUS out of the box does come with specific layers to each one of its different prototypes. So if you're dealing with a room concept, it has its layer. If you're dealing with a equipment concept, it has its layer. If you're dealing with a furniture concept, it has its layer. So you just have to be sensitive to that. Once ARCHIBUS goes ahead and you attach that asset, whether it's a room or a block or whatever it may be, it moves it off that prototype layer onto an asset layer, essentially as an asset symbol layer, and it converts it into an asset and therefore moves it onto a different layer. So you just have to be conscious of that when drawing it. Make sure you draw on the prototype layer, and therefore it'll move it to the asset layer. And then the last one is the text layer. It will automatically drop some text either off to the side or in the middle, depending on what rule it is. But you just have to be conscious of those are 3 different layers that are dealing with the ARCHIBUS product. With that being said, each different type of asset has its own layer. So I'll give 2 examples here. The rooms, for example, when you're depicting space inside of ARCHIBUS, essentially goes on to the RM layer. So you want to make sure that all your polylines are all drawn onto the RM layer. And you can see an example here. I've got the RM layer there. I usually make it a cyan in color. Therefore, if it's not there in my drawing, I want to be able to create it and draw my polylines onto it or move them onto it. I also have the equipment layer. The equipment layer will also, if I'm drawing my blocks or want to associate a boiler or something to ARCHIBUS, I can move that piece of equipment onto the EQ layer and then be able to tag it back as an asset. So that's just an example of 2 different layers in 2 different prototypes inside the ARCHIBUS world that allows you to therefore use those layers when you start introducing or connecting them as assets to the ARCHIBUS product when dealing with that sort of concept. So I'm going to flip over to AutoCAD and take a look at these sort of topics, so polylines and layers. I'm going to open my AutoCAD window again. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at the polyline command. You may be familiar with the line command, which is essentially the basic line command, but there is also a polyline command. You can get to that polyline command by going to the ribbon. There is a ribbon-based item inside of there. You can also go down to the command line as well and be able to type polyline or P-line if you want to into the command line, P-line, into the command line and be able to start that command. You can also use the ribbon up top here as well. But what you're going to want to do is, for those that haven't been dealing with it, you want to be able to draw it out. Now, obviously, before I start doing that, the first thing I want to do is take a look at my layers. If I look at my layer pull-down menu, I want to be able to ensure that the RM is what I'm drawing on. So it just happened to have one inside of here, but if you don't, you want to be able to add it in. So here, how do you add one in? You come up, go to the Add New Layer. It's here, for example, since I don't have the equipment layer, I'm going to go and add that equipment layer in. So EQ would be the example of the layer, and you can specify the color accordingly. Once you're done with that, then you can start using that layer and putting objects on that layer. So for me, I'm interested in the RM layer. I'm drawing a polyline and want to be able to put it on that RM layer. So I want to go down and make sure that my RM layer is current before drawing, and then start using my polyline command accordingly. So now I can draw, I'm on the RM layer, and away I go. The way the polyline command works, as you start choosing your different points inside of space, it just continues on as a single entity line work, and then I can then therefore start drawing my rectangle or my definition of my space, and I want to be able to close it off. Now, you'll notice as the end of this polyline command, I've essentially got the close as an option, as one of my command line options. I can then utilize that close in order to close my polyline out. Obviously, that's very important because I want to be able to close it so that I get the right area calculation accordingly. So how do I use it? I use C for close, enter, and it closes it out and completes my corresponding space. So that's very important, again, to make sure you close out your polylines, because if you don't, essentially if you leave them open, so I'm just going to draw another one here off to the side. If I do leave it open, like this one, essentially you're relying on AutoCAD to go and take a best guess on how to close that out, and it may not be very accurate when the product goes and does that. So you just want to make sure that you close it out so you get an accurate area calculation. And how do you know that a polyline is closed out? You can actually go and be able to select it and do a list or a properties inside of it. So I'm just going to do a list here, for example. As I do a list, it will indicate that that polyline is open. Versus this other one over here, we'll do a list on this other one, and you will see this one's closed, and it is closed. So we're really looking to make sure all our polylines are in a closed status to make sure that it does a very precise calculation inside of there. So again, make sure all your polylines are closed. So that's an important piece of information when dealing with that sort of concept. So that's an example of a polyline. Now, obviously, you're going to go down around room by room in order to draw out your space. So here, for example, I've got an office. So I'm just going to zoom in here to this office. And I have an existing polyline, so I just highlighted it here of depicting that space, and it's on the corresponding room layer, and it's a closed polyline. So this is the sort of rooms that you want, space that you want to start depicting on each one of your different rooms and each one of your different workstations, again, depending on how far down you want to go, and be able to deal with that sort of concept. Again, if I do an area calculation here, a quick area of the object, and the object's going to be the polyline, you'll see that it calculates out my area as 239 square feet, which is exactly what ARCHIBUS uses in order to do its reporting inside the ARCHIBUS application. So that's our end game. We're trying to draw the polylines out, draw them so that we can get the accurate area so that our reports are very, very precise. So that's our drawing process. When drawing these polylines, the one thing we have to be concerned of is how do we draw these polylines? We just saw an example of drawing a corresponding office. In that office, where do we draw that polyline? Is it in the window? Is it inside of the wall? Essentially, where are you drawing that polyline? It can be very difficult to start understanding that and where do I draw it. And this is a good point in time in starting to take a look at what is your standard methodology for depicting space. So there's several different classification systems out there in the world. I've got just two recommended here that are popular in North America. BOMA is one and IFMA is another. And again, these are just governing bodies that start doing a space classification system that you can become familiar with and start using to depict where is that line work falling within your drawing. So you may want to go to one of these sites, be able to fetch their corresponding information that they have, and be able to follow that governing body with those different standards. ARCHIBUS can use each one of these different standards. It is very versatile. It's up to you to pick which standards you want to follow, educate yourself on that standard in order to polyline appropriately. So something that you want to keep in mind at this point in time is find out what spatial standards you want to use, and then go and fetch them and educate yourself on them. At this point in time, it's good to introduce another conversation that we get quite frequently is other standards that you have to worry about when dealing with your AutoCAD drawings. Some internal considerations you might want to consider is a CAD standard. So maybe you start coming up with a universal CAD standard if you don't already have one and depicting each one of those different items. Now, this is not a requirement of ARCHIBUS, but it's something that you might want to consider at this point in time when looking at cleaning up your drawings and standardizing your drawings to come up with some sort of documentation in order to have on hand so that if you get another drawing as an as-built, you know what standards to follow as part of that process. So a very common question we get at this point in time, and it's a good suggestion. Also at this point in time, you may want to look at your internal processes. Your internal processes is dealing with how does those master drawings get updated? Where do they come from? How do you deal with projects? Items like that. So dealing with from the point in time when you're handing off that as-built to a contractor, performing a project, getting your as-builts back, and then updating your master drawings, what is that round-trip process and how do you handle it? So i.e., how do you keep your master drawing list up to date so that your ARCHIBUS is up to date? So this is definitely something you want to internally have this discussion on, because once you have that master set, you want to keep them as clean as possible and as up to date as possible as you can. So definitely something that you want to consider as part of that process. Going into the block concept, inside of ARCHIBUS, ARCHIBUS can deal with blocks inside the drawings. You can take a block, whether it's a corresponding furniture block or a equipment block, or there's lots of other different types of blocks you have, and convert them into an asset. So you want to be able to have some sort of methodologies and requirements with blocks as well, just like we had for polylines. So the first item is that we want to be consistent for naming our blocks. So as we have, for example, a boiler in one drawing, is it the boiler name the same block in the second drawing? Or if you have a piece of furniture and you're tagging it back, does that piece of furniture the same nomenclature? Chair 1 is in chair drawing 1 and chair 1 is in drawing 2. So just make sure you have consistency from one drawing to the next on that nomenclature. And obviously, if you have a block library, make sure that your block library follows your nomenclature of the blocks that are in your drawing. The logic with that is because ARCHIBUS can insert assets for you into your drawings and be able to scale them accordingly. So keep that in mind, so that you want your nomenclature to be the same, so that ARCHIBUS can fetch, if you say look for a chair, you've got that chair nomenclature. Second item is dynamic blocking. ARCHIBUS does not support at this point in time dynamic blocks, so it's definitely a consideration that you want to look at. If you consider your blocks being tagged back to ARCHIBUS, they do not support the dynamic block concepts. So if you are looking right now at a block library and determining whether you want to go with a dynamic block or just a plain block library, and you're looking at ARCHIBUS and tagging those blocks back to ARCHIBUS, I would go with a plain block library. So something to keep in mind when dealing with the ARCHIBUS product. Next item is draw blocks on one-to-one. So as we draw our blocks in, whether it's in a block library or your blocks on your corresponding drawing, we want to essentially draw them at a one-to-one scale factor. So because if you use your block library and you have all your drawings, your blocks drawn in this library, ARCHIBUS will take that object from your block library and be able to insert it to your drawing and scale it based on the scaling that is depicted on your units for your individual drawings. So you want to make sure you draw them at one-to-one so they get inserted and scaled properly accordingly. When dealing with blocks, there's some best practices we want to be able to perform, and this is not a requirement, but more of a best practice. All your blocks should be drawn in layer 0. So when you first create your block off to the side, not in your drawing, essentially you're going to create it on layer 0 so that when you insert it onto the drawing, it takes on whatever drawing property of that layer that you put it onto. So you want to make sure that they're all drawn on layer 0 so that when you move it onto the right layer, it takes on that characteristic such as color or line type or any of those different characteristics. The other item we want to do is make sure we have no empty blocks. It's more of a drawing practice just to make sure that you don't have to insert a block that has nothing inside of it and therefore have an object inside your drawing that is empty. It's just a rule of thumb. Or if you have a block, don't go in and alter the block and remove all the objects, but leave the block inside of there. So just a knowledge-based item. Now, at this point in time, you've got your drawings organized, you've started your polylining process based on your spatial standards, you've got your blocks inside, you've got your block names cleaned up, and you're starting to finish up that process and your drawings are ready to go. So you've got your master set ready to go. Well, now you want to start looking at towards the ARCHIBUS product and looking at your next steps. So your next step is going to be education. You want to be able to get educated on that ARCHIBUS product to make sure that you know how to integrate into your drawing and be able to bring that inside the product. You want to then look at configuring the ARCHIBUS product. So obviously you're going to have things like your layer list, your custom, your own layer standards that you're following, and et cetera, et cetera. So you want the ARCHIBUS product in order to configure it so that you can use some of these standards in which you already have. So that's an exercise you'll have to do inside the ARCHIBUS product. And then obviously after that point in time, then you can start tagging your assets, your prototypes into the ARCHIBUS product. We call it tagging, essentially converting it from a prototype into an asset into ARCHIBUS so that we can start reporting back on it. So that's obviously the next step and be able to do that and report on it. So that concludes our topics for today. So hopefully that has now prepped you in order to look at your drawings, educate you on how your drawings are laid out so that you can then look at bringing your drawings into ARCHIBUS and having them ready at this point in time. If you do inquire, need to find out more information, you can use the contact information here in order to follow up and have some follow-up questions if you like. Hopefully this session was helpful for you, and I look forward to the next session. Take care.